Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm your host, I'm Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today I am delighted to be joined by the amazing Martine Spaans, who does a whole bunch of amazing stuff, particularly Tamalaki, but also does a whole bunch of mentoring and support of all sorts of people in the games industry. So I am going to bring her on screen. Martine, how are you doing? It's been forever, absolutely forever since I last saw you. Tell everybody who you are and what you're about.
Hi, yeah, it's so great to see you again. Like you say, it has been forever. When travel was still a thing, we used to meet like I think once a month, and I was joking that I saw you more often than family. But yeah, my name is Martine Spaans. I am located in the Netherlands. I've been in the games industry for I think roughly 15 years now. And about 9 years ago, I started Tamalaki to really focus on bringing games for women to mobile. And I guess as most people know now, mobile is basically a space where female players are a bit more dominant. But most of the games are still made by men. Yeah, over the last 9 years, I've talked to a lot of developers to basically help them to sort of optimize their game design for women.
And in case anyone's wondering, I've had a bit of a trouble with, if you're watching the YouTube part of it, I've had a bit of trouble today with the connection to our usual tools. So if things look a little bit messy, that's entirely my fault. Nothing to do with the team. So I think you mentioned a couple of things there. So obviously we used to catch up, like you said, at least once a month, but it would be anywhere in the world. It would be, I think we've caught up in lovely places like small islands in the middle of the Mediterranean. We've been in, I think we were in Kiev, I think, for several times. The US,
Singapore, perhaps. Was it?
Yeah, I think we've been all over the place. And the reason we end up in these places is because we both had roles that are very focused around business development for various people, sometimes for our own projects, sometimes for others. I don't think everybody understands what biz dev is about, and I think you've got an amazing kind of perspective on that. And I think also particularly because here I am, cis white male, there's a certain kind of experience that has, and I think obviously you've got a different perspective, and I think it'd be interesting for people to sort of just see what biz dev is about, and what the market is like, what it's like to be in this space and trying to meet people and communicate about ideas around games. I mean,
Yeah.
do you want to sort of start off? I'm thinking, what I mean, is it worth describing the sort of biz dev type functions you've done and your kind of experience doing that?
I think so, because I think that the type of biz dev that I've been doing is different than what people think about. Biz dev, you might be thinking of someone in like, suit and nice shoes and just like doing contracts mainly. But I mean, obviously I've worked on contract work as well, but the main part of the biz dev that I do is just like connecting developers, well, not just to our company, but also basically to each other to really sort of help establish relationships, and also to help with the commercial aspect of game design. For the developers that connect with Tamalaki, like I mentioned earlier, we sort of bring that female perspective sort of into the games. And that really comes into sort of a game design level. And then, of course, like how do you design your monetization, your messaging, the look and feel of the game, and it comes down to like tiny details, maybe even like the name of your character and things like that can really, easily be overlooked, but can matter a lot. I think that the type of biz dev that I do is a lot more creative than people think it is. It's not just briefcases and contracts, luckily, because otherwise you'd be very bored.
Don't care about games, is it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, because I know you've done a whole bunch of stuff around kind of like platforms and KPI. I can't talk today. SDKs and things like that in the past as well. But I think there's a common thread. The common thread for me is you are dealing with people, and particularly when we're dealing with game developers, there's a certain level of understanding, a certain camaraderie that we need to have to show that we do get it. And obviously, as a developer and as a designer in particular, that brings one aspect, but also as a commercial person, that has a different perspective. Do you think there's a challenge for people to understand how to get their heads into the right part of that and to communicate better with developer teams? Is there any kind of tips or tricks you'd suggest?
What we've also always found really important is just like open honesty, and we're not afraid to overshare, basically. So, when, for example, the process when we sign on a new developer, even before we start talking about a contract, we just share a lot, a lot of our experiences, best practices, data. You might think like, oh, aren't you like giving away sort of your secret sauce and your business model and all that? But most of it is in the execution of it. You can tell people about it, you can sort of show them the best examples, but really the magic of it is still in the execution of it. But by sort of giving away that knowledge already in an early stage, you do already start building up a level of trust. And then even if if that deal won't work out, then no problem. But you have actually built up sort of already a connection that can become very valuable in the future.
And I agree with that. And I was laughing earlier when you kind of said we overshare, because that's exactly what you mean. And I'm terrible at that in the nicest way. I hope. But I mean, I think what you're saying, I think is really, really, really toned to me, because it's like I have people who come back to me like 3, 4, 5 years later and say, oh, remember that talk you gave in blah 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 blah? Maybe, no. Oh, I really like that, and could you do this for me? Or do you know somebody who can help me with that? And I think there's something about games which is, even though it is quite a big industry in some ways, it feels very small still.
Definitely.
I think there's definitely a sense that if you burn bridges, that's going to cost you. Is that? I mean, do you feel that?
Yeah, I think so. Luckily, I don't know a lot of people who really burnt their bridges. I think most people in the industry are sort of, I think most people in the industry are sort of very, comfortable and friendly in the space. But yeah, it's as you say, when you sort of give back to the industry and the community, it can really sort of come back to you later. I've also had developers that I used to work with when in my first job in the industry, I was at Spill Games when that was still sort of a network of Flash gaming portals, and I was the licensing manager, so I was like licensing hundreds of Flash games per year. And sometimes I still come across some of those developers from then. They're like, "Oh, I remember you," and they tell me the story of where they are now. Maybe they built an entire studio, or maybe they're still indie because they like it that way, or they joined a big studio, something like that. And
some of them probably have set up big studios as well. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so it's always interesting to kind of see then years later where people are, and then they still remember you after all these years because of the connection you built.
And I think that's actually quite I think that's, for me, that's one of the, maybe it's the nice thing about being old. But I've seen so many different studios and so many different people, some of whom are like the gods of the industry now. And I won't name names. I name drop all the time, as you know, because I don't think about it. But there are some great people out there. But the fact is that they started out like all of us. Like, we just want to make games. We just like making games. The difference between a game player and a game maker is about that kind of space where you are happy to go through the pain threshold of working out what fun looks like. I think that's different from a playing experience. I think that's there's some sort of craving that we have as game makers where we enjoy the process as much as we enjoy the thing that's delivered. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. And I also notice it when I just like play a game now. I can still definitely have fun playing it, but at the meantime, I'm also analyzing it and having fun doing the analysis.
Yeah, exactly. I love that, and I think it's a neat thing to try and hold on to. I mean, I think when you're doing biz dev in particular, but we'll talk about games targeted for women in a bit, because I think you've got amazing amount of insight on that space. And no, not just because you're on, because you've worked on it. But there's something about keeping that love of playfulness that's really hard to do, I think, when you've been playing your game hundreds of thousands of times to get it right. It's very easy to fall into a sort of jaded pattern. It's very easy to forget the joyfulness, the childlike mindset of playfulness that I think, got us into doing this in the first place, and get caught in the mechanics. So I think, even a business development person needs that sense of like childlike wonder, even when they're seeing the 30th, 40th different platform game the same day. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, totally. And that's also where I sort of count myself lucky to work in sort of in the mobile space, which moves a lot faster than, say, like the console space. Because I do work on different multiple projects per year, and not just one project for many years. So that definitely sort of keeps in the variety and keeps it interesting. But the example that you say, like for example, playing the 30th platformer in a day. Sometimes I also do judging for like indie contests, and then you do actually see the same type of game like multiple times per day. And then you need to sort of reset yourself every time to because you feel like a broken record, because you're like repeating the same feedback every time, but then you need to keep reminding yourself like it's a different developer, it's a different person, they have different perspective. And it's but the thing that keeps that really joyful is again sort of the human interaction. When you see that developer sort of taking notes and like pointing out, asking questions and pointing out things in their game, you're like, right, this is what makes it interesting, because we're having like sort of an experience together to make the game better.
And you mentioned the sort of award things, and obviously we've both done that together many times. And I still love every time when you get somebody, whether they've done it before or whether it's their first time, seeing their kind of their efforts and the way that they learn, even whether they win the competition or not, I think is almost irrelevant. It's the fact that they're put into a pressure situation where they've got to explain to somebody else who is a games knowledgeable person why their game is going to matter. And I think that exercise is incredibly interesting. And I find myself learning all the time when I'm doing that, because I'm looking at the techniques and looking at the thinking. I'm trying to think about analyzing the game at the same time, and trying to think how I can give them something useful in feedback that can help them on their way. And I don't mean that in a kind of patronizing way. I think it's just we're all in it together.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's easy to sort of get that whole jaded experience, like, oh, another developer making their first game and falling for the same mistakes. But that's toxic. And I definitely also always want to avoid that. By reminding myself to like I'm interacting with a new person and they're eager to learn, and that's what they're here for. And it also helps to manage expectations. I think a lot of developers who start out fresh, they're not expecting their first game to become a multi-million-dollar hit. They know that they're in a learning curve and a learning process. So the feedback that you give in, even though in the back of your mind you might be thinking like, well, just toss out this project, it's never going to work. That's not the point. The point is that the feedback that you give helps them to learn and sort of apply that feedback to later projects to keep on growing.
And even if they don't get it immediately, it's in the back of the mind. At some point, the reinforcement of those messages will hopefully get through. And we've seen some games that have gone from being, no, don't do that. And then suddenly, the fifth, fourth, whatever iteration of it, you go, oh, okay. Oh,
yeah,
okay,
exactly. Then all of a sudden they like sort of flipped, a certain aspect in the gameplay or in the core game loop, and you're like, now it's interesting, and that's like when it hits the sweet spot, and I'm like, now you're going somewhere.
And it feels almost impossible for us to work out what that thing will be that we'll say that will do that. And in fact, none of it's us, actually. It's all about us contributing to the wider sense of presence that developer will get. I wish I could say I got the magic formula. There we go. Ding, there it is. I just say the word, it's there. Obviously, that doesn't happen.
Right.
But it is lovely when you sort of see that game that you thought was interesting, or you thought, yeah, I don't know, and then suddenly you go, yeah, I got it. That makes sense. That works.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you is business development itself a secondary job, or is it part of game development? What do you think?